Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a world that feels almost familiar at first glance, yet quietly hides rules so strange, so unforgiving, that even the smallest mistake could cost you everything. A world where ordinary actions, things you wouldn't even think twice about today, could lead to punishment. Not just a warning, not just a fine, but consequences that lingered, shaped by fear, belief, and the need for control. The night settles slowly over the ancient settlement, and as it does, the sounds begin to soften. Fires crackle in shallow clay pits, their orange glow flickering across mud brick walls. The air smells faintly of smoke, damp earth, and something cooking, grain, perhaps, or meat, though it is difficult to tell. Life here is simple on the surface, yet every action is measured, every choice quietly observed. A man walks carefully along a narrow path between homes, his footsteps deliberate. Not because he is tired, but because he is thinking. In this place, thinking before acting is not just wise, it is necessary. One wrong step, one overlooked rule, and the consequences are not easily undone. He pauses near a doorway, glancing inside. A family sits close together around a small fire. No one speaks loudly. No one moves too freely. Even laughter, when it appears, is restrained, as if joy itself must remain within certain boundaries. Because here there are rules, not written in books as we know them today, not displayed openly for all to read. Instead, they live in memory, in tradition, in the expectations passed from one generation to the next. They are carried in the voices of elders, enforced by leaders, and feared by everyone. And some of these rules seem almost impossible to understand. Far beyond the edge of the settlement, under a sky scattered with dim stars, lies a stretch of land that no one crosses after dark. Not because it is physically dangerous, not because of wild animals or harsh terrain, but because of something less visible, something believed. It is said that certain places belong not to people, but to forces that must not be disturbed. Step there at the wrong time, and you are no longer just a person walking. You are someone who has broken a boundary, someone who must answer for it. And answering, in this world, is never simple. The man turns away from the doorway and continues walking. His path leads toward the center of the settlement, where a larger fire burns. A few figures stand around it, their faces lit unevenly by the flames. They speak in low tones, serious, focused. Something has happened. It always begins this way, quietly, almost unnoticed. A small action, a moment that might seem insignificant. Perhaps someone touched something they should not have. Perhaps they spoke words that were not theirs to say. Or perhaps, more troubling, they failed to act when they were expected to. In this world, silence can be just as dangerous as action. The group by the fire shifts as the man approaches. No one greets him directly, but they acknowledge his presence with slight movements, subtle glances. He joins them without question, There is no need to ask what is wrong. The tension in the air already tells him enough. Someone has broken a rule, not a minor one, not something that can be ignored or quietly corrected. This is different. This is the kind of mistake that demands attention, that requires a response. And in this place, responses are never random. They follow patterns, traditions, beliefs shaped over centuries, passed down long before anyone alive can remember their origin. No one questions them, not openly, because questioning itself can be seen as stepping outside the order, and stepping outside the order is dangerous. The fire crackles louder for a moment, sending sparks upward into the dark sky. One of the elders begins to speak, his voice slow and measured. Each word carries weight, not because it is loud, but because it is expected to be heard. The man listens carefully, his expression unchanged, but inside, his thoughts move quickly. He knows what is coming. Punishment, not in the way we might imagine it now. Not simply as a consequence meant to correct behavior. Here, punishment serves a deeper purpose. It is meant to restore balance, to repair something unseen that has been disturbed. Because in this world, a broken rule is not just a personal mistake, it is a disruption. A ripple that spreads outward, affecting more than just the individual. And that ripple must be contained. Some punishments are immediate, swift, clear. Others unfold slowly, shaped by ritual and belief. But all of them carry the same underlying message. The rules are not optional. They are part of the world itself. The elder's voice continues, describing what has been done. The details are simple, almost mundane. A task left incomplete, an offering made incorrectly, a boundary crossed without permission. To someone from another time, it might seem like nothing, but here it is everything. The group listens in silence. No one interrupts. No one questions. The decision has already begun forming, not in a single moment, but as part of a process that feels both inevitable and unchangeable. The man glances briefly at the faces around him. Some are calm. Others reveal traces of unease, not because they disagree, but because they understand. They understand how easily it could have been them. In a world like this, safety does not come from avoiding danger alone. It comes from knowing the rules, remembering them, following them, even when they do not make sense. Because the moment you forget, even for a second, you become vulnerable. The fire burns lower as the discussion continues. Shadows stretch longer, blending together until the edges of the settlement begin to disappear into darkness. The night grows deeper, quieter, and yet the tension remains. Somewhere nearby, the person who made the mistake waits. Perhaps they already know what they have done. Perhaps they are still hoping it will pass unnoticed. But it will not. Nothing truly goes unnoticed here. Eventually, the voices around the fire begin to fade. Not because the matter is resolved, because the next step must be taken elsewhere. The decision, once formed, does not linger. It moves forward, carried by those who enforce it. The man steps back, watching as the group slowly disperses. Each person returns to their place, their role, their quiet routines. On the surface, life continues as it always has. But beneath that surface, something has shifted. A line has been crossed. And by the time the sun rises again, that crossing will have consequences. Not loud, not chaotic, but deliberate. Controlled, almost ritualistic. The man turns once more, heading back toward the narrow paths between the homes. The fires are dimmer now. The settlement sleeps, or at least appears to. He moves carefully, his thoughts still lingering on what he has heard. In this world, survival is not just about strength or skill. It is about awareness, about understanding the invisible lines that shape every action. And most of all, it is about remembering that even the smallest mistake can carry a weight far greater than it seems. Because 5,000 years ago, the difference between right and wrong was not always clear, but the consequences always were. And as the night deepens, the quiet tension settles into something heavier, something waiting, because this is only the beginning. The story does not end with a broken rule. It begins there. The night does not fully rest, even when the settlement appears still. Beneath the silence, there is movement, slow, careful, almost deliberate. A door opens somewhere, just slightly, then closes again without a sound. Someone is awake, listening, waiting, perhaps thinking about the same thing that now lingers over everyone like a quiet shadow. The person at the center of it all sits alone, not far from the outer edge of the settlement. A small fire burns in front of them, weaker than the others, its light uneven. Their posture is still, but not calm. There is a stiffness in the way they hold themselves, as if even the act of sitting has become uncertain. They replay the moment again and again in their mind, trying to find the exact point where things went wrong. It did not feel like a mistake at the time. It felt ordinary, routine, something they had done before, or at least believed they understood. But now, in the quiet, that certainty has begun to fade. Memory is not always reliable here. It bends under pressure, reshapes itself under fear. What once seemed clear becomes uncertain. What felt harmless now feels heavy. And in this place, that shift in understanding is often the first sign that consequences are already on their way. A faint sound in the distance makes them look up. Footsteps, slow, steady, unmistakable. Not the hurried movement of someone going about their work, but something more measured, more intentional. The kind of steps that carry purpose, and with it, authority. They do not stand. They do not run. There is nowhere to go, and even if there were, leaving would only make things worse. In this world, facing what comes is not bravery, it is expectation. To avoid it is to break another rule, one that carries its own weight. The figures approach without speaking. Their shapes become clearer as they move into the dim light, faces partially hidden by shadow. There are 3 of them. That number is not random. It never is. Every part of this process follows a structure that has been repeated countless times before. One of them steps forward slightly, enough to signal that they will speak. Their voice, when it comes, is low and even, carrying no anger, no urgency. That absence is more unsettling than any raised tone could be. Emotion has no place in what is about to happen. They speak the name of the person sitting by the fire. Not loudly, but clearly. It is not a question. It is a confirmation, an acknowledgement that what has begun cannot be undone by silence or denial. The moment has already passed beyond that point. The accused nods once, slowly. There is no attempt to explain, not yet. Explanation comes later, if it comes at all. First, there is recognition. Acceptance that the process has started, and that stepping outside of it now would only deepen the problem. The 3 figures exchange brief glances, almost imperceptible, yet full of meaning. They have done this before, many times. Each situation is different in detail, but the structure remains the same. It must remain the same. Consistency is what gives it power. They gesture for the person to stand. The movement is small, but it carries weight. Standing is not just a physical act here, it is symbolic. It marks the transition from ordinary life into something else, something more controlled, more observed. The walk back toward the center of the settlement is quiet. No one speaks. The only sounds are the soft crunch of earth beneath their feet and the occasional crackle of distant fires. Yet even in this silence, there is awareness. Others are watching, though they do not make it obvious. Doors remain closed, but behind them, eyes are open. Ears are listening. This is not just about one person. It never is. Every action like this reinforces the boundaries for everyone else. It reminds them of where the lines are drawn and what happens when those lines are crossed. As they reach the central fire, it has been rebuilt, strengthened. The flames burn higher now, casting wider light. More people are gathered than before, though they stand at a distance, forming a loose circle. No one steps too close. There is a space in the center, left intentionally empty. That space is where the person is guided to stand. The 3 figures take their positions around them, not forming a barrier, but creating a presence. It is not about trapping the individual. It is about framing the moment, making it clear that what happens here is separate from ordinary time, ordinary behavior. An elder steps forward once again, the same voice as before, steady and controlled. They begin to speak, not directly to the accused at first, but to those gathered. The words are familiar, repeated across generations, yet still listened to with full attention. They speak of balance, of order, of the unseen connections that bind the community together. It is not just about rules as instructions, but rules as a reflection of something deeper, something that must be maintained for everything else to function. Then finally, the focus shifts. The elder turns toward the person standing in the center. There is a pause, long enough to feel intentional, long enough to ensure that every eye, every thought is directed toward this single moment. Silence settles again, thicker than before. The question, when it comes, is simple, not an accusation, not a list of what was done wrong, just a question that invites acknowledgement, an opportunity, perhaps, to speak, to align their understanding with what is already known by others. The person hesitates, but only briefly. Their voice, when it emerges, is quiet, but steady enough to be heard. They describe what they did, choosing their words carefully, not adding more than necessary, but not hiding either. There is no interruption. The explanation is allowed to unfold fully, even if it does not change the outcome. Because here, speaking is part of the process. It is not about defense, but about clarity, about ensuring that the act is understood in the same way by everyone present. When they finish, the silence returns, but it feels different now, heavier, more defined, because now there is no uncertainty left. The act has been named. The line that was crossed has been made visible. And with that visibility comes the next step, the one that cannot be avoided. The elder nods once, slowly, as if marking the transition from one phase to another. And somewhere within the gathered crowd, a subtle shift occurs. Not movement, not sound, but awareness tightening, focusing. Because what comes next is not just about what was done. It is about what must now be done in response. And in this world, that response is never left to chance. The air around the fire feels denser now, as if even the night itself is paying attention. No one shifts their weight too much. No one lets their gaze wander for long. The moment has taken hold of everyone present, pulling them into a shared stillness that is difficult to break. The elder does not rush. Time in this part of the process is stretched deliberately. Each pause serves a purpose, allowing the weight of what has been said to settle into the minds of those listening. Nothing here is accidental, not even silence. The accused stands at the center, aware of every small movement around them. The flicker of firelight on faces, the faint rustle of clothing, the subtle change in breathing from those nearby. These details become sharper, almost overwhelming, as the mind searches for something to hold onto. But there is nothing to hold onto, only the knowledge that whatever comes next has already been shaped long before this night. The decision is not being created here, it is being revealed. That realization brings a different kind of unease, one that is quieter but deeper. The elder finally speaks again, their voice carrying just enough to reach the outer edges of the gathering. They begin not with judgment, but with recollection. A story, or something like it. one that those present have heard before, though perhaps not in this exact moment. It is a story of another time, another person, another mistake. The details are slightly different, but the pattern is the same. A line crossed, a balance disturbed, a response required. The repetition is intentional, a way of connecting the present to the past. Because in this world, nothing exists in isolation. Every action echoes something that came before it. Every consequence follows a path that has already been walked. The story is not just a reminder, it is a reinforcement, a way of anchoring the present moment within a larger, unbroken chain. The accused listens, though their eyes remain lowered. They know this story. They have heard it since they were young, perhaps without ever imagining that one day they would stand in its place, that they would become part of that chain. When the elder finishes, there is another pause. This one feels heavier, not because something is missing, but because something is about to be added. The space between words becomes more significant than the words themselves. It holds anticipation, tension, and a quiet certainty. One of the three figures steps forward slightly, just enough to shift the balance of the scene. Their role is not to speak, but to signal, to mark the transition from explanation to action. It is a small movement, but everyone notices. The elder turns their gaze back to the accused, studying them for a moment that feels longer than it is. There is no visible emotion in their expression, but there is attention, focus, as if measuring something that cannot be seen. Then slowly, they begin to outline what must be done. The words are simple, but their meaning is not. The response is not immediate punishment in the way one might expect. It is structured, layered, a series of actions that must be followed, each with its own purpose. It is less about causing pain and more about restoring something that has been disrupted. The accused listens carefully, absorbing each detail. There is no interruption, no question. To question now would be to step outside the process again, and that is not something they are willing to risk. The first part is acknowledgement, already given. The second is correction, not just of the action itself, but of its meaning. The accused must return to the place where the mistake occurred, not alone, but under observation. They must repeat the action, this time correctly, aligning it with the expectations that were not met before. This may seem simple, but it is not, because it is not just about doing something right. It is about demonstrating understanding, about showing that the mistake was not rooted in disregard, but in something that can be corrected. That distinction matters more than anything else. A murmur moves faintly through the outer edges of the group, quickly silenced, not out of fear, but out of habit. Even small reactions are controlled here, kept within limits that preserve the order of the moment. The elder continues. The next part is more difficult. It involves separation, a temporary distancing from the rest of the community. Not exile, not abandonment, but a controlled withdrawal. The accused will not take part in certain activities, will not share in certain spaces, for a period of time that has already been decided. This is not meant to isolate completely. It is meant to create awareness, to make the absence felt, both by the individual and by those around them, to remind everyone that actions have consequences that extend beyond the moment in which they occur. The accused nods again, more slowly this time. There is understanding in the gesture, but also something else. A quiet recognition of what this will mean. The absence of routine, the shift in how others will see them, even if only for a time. Reputation here is fragile, not in the sense of status or pride, but in the sense of trust. Trust is built over time through consistent actions that align with the rules. And while one mistake does not erase it completely, it does leave a mark. The elder's voice softens slightly as they move to the final part. Restoration. This is where the process comes full circle. After correction and separation, there must be a return, a reintegration into the community marked by a specific act. Something visible, something shared, something that signals that balance has been restored. It is not enough to simply wait. The return must be earned, demonstrated through action, not just intention. And once it is complete, the matter is considered resolved, not forgotten, but placed in its proper place within the larger pattern. The explanation ends. No dramatic conclusion, no raised voices, no visible reaction, just a quiet stillness, as if the moment has reached its natural end. The three figures step back slightly, their role shifting once again. The accused remains where they are for a moment longer, as if waiting for confirmation that they may move. When none comes, they understand that the process has already begun. They turn slowly, stepping out of the center. The crowd does not part dramatically, but space opens naturally as they pass. No one reaches out. No one speaks. Yet the awareness remains, following them as they move away from the fire. The settlement feels different now, not because anything visible has changed, but because something has been reaffirmed. The rules have been enforced, the process has been carried out, and the balance, at least for now, has been addressed. The fires begin to burn lower again, one by one. People return to their homes, their routines, their quiet thoughts. The night continues, as it always does, moving steadily toward morning. But for the one at the center of this, the night is far from over. Their path is already set, not by choice, but by necessity, and every step from this moment forward will be watched, measured, understood within the same system that brought them here. Because in this world, a mistake is never just a moment. It becomes a journey, and that journey has only just begun. The fire behind them fades into the distance as they walk back toward the edge of the settlement. Each step feels heavier now, not because of physical exhaustion, but because of awareness. The path ahead is no longer uncertain. It has been defined, shaped by words that cannot be taken back. The night air feels cooler than before. Or perhaps it only seems that way. Sensations become sharper after moments like this, as if the body is trying to anchor itself in something real, while the mind continues to process what has happened. They reach their dwelling, but do not enter immediately. Instead, they pause at the doorway, looking inside as if seeing it for the first time. Nothing has changed, yet everything feels slightly different. Familiar objects now carry a quiet distance. Eventually, they step inside. The fire within is nearly out, reduced to a few glowing embers. They kneel beside it, not to warm themselves, but out of habit. Routine remains, even when everything else shifts. It is one of the few things that does not change easily. Sleep does not come quickly. Their thoughts return to the elder's words, repeating them in fragments, trying to hold onto every detail. There is no confusion about what must be done, but understanding does not make it easier. If anything, it makes the weight clearer. Outside, the settlement grows quieter still. Even the subtle sounds begin to fade. One by one, the last traces of movement disappear, leaving only the occasional whisper of wind moving through narrow spaces between structures. The night reaches its deepest point, where time feels suspended. At some moment, unclear when their eyes finally close, not fully at rest, but enough to drift into something like sleep. It is not peaceful. Images repeat, not as dreams, but as echoes. The fire, the circle, the faces, the voice of the elder, all of it blending together into something that lingers just beneath awareness. When morning comes, it does not announce itself loudly. Light seeps slowly into the settlement, soft at first, then gradually stronger. The sky shifts from deep darkness to a muted gray, and then to pale gold. Another day begins, as it always does, regardless of what has happened before. But for one person, this day is different. They wake earlier than usual, not because they must, but because sleep no longer holds them. The moment their eyes open, the memory returns fully, clear, and unavoidable. There is no delay, no easing into the day, only continuation. They rise without hesitation. There is no time to linger, no space for uncertainty. The first step of the process must begin today. Delay would not only be noticed, it would be understood as resistance. And resistance here carries its own consequences. They step outside. The settlement is already beginning to stir. A few figures move between dwellings, starting their daily tasks. Some glance briefly in their direction, not staring, but aware. News travels quietly here, carried not by loud announcements, but by shared observation. Nothing needs to be said. Everyone already knows. They begin walking toward the place where the mistake occurred. The path feels longer now, though though it has not changed. Each familiar landmark seems slightly altered, not in appearance, but in meaning. What was once routine now feels significant. Two figures join them along the way, not by coincidence. They were assigned to observe, to ensure that the process is followed correctly. Their presence is not aggressive, not intrusive, but it is constant. A reminder that this is not something to be done alone. No one speaks as they walk. Words are unnecessary here. The structure of the situation has already been defined. What remains is action, not discussion. Even small talk would feel out of place, as if it might disrupt the order of what is unfolding. They reach the location just as the sun begins to rise fully. In daylight, it appears ordinary. Nothing about it suggests that it holds any particular importance. And yet, this is where everything changed, where a small action became something more. They stop. For a moment, no one moves. The air is still, carrying only the faint sounds of the settlement behind them. The two observers take their positions slightly apart, giving space, but maintaining presence. Their role is clear: to watch, to remember, to ensure. The person at the center takes a slow breath. This is the moment of correction. They step forward, approaching the exact place where the mistake occurred. The memory of it returns sharply now, more vivid than before. Every detail is clear: the movement, the timing, the small decision that seemed insignificant. Now it must be done again, but differently. They begin carefully. Every motion is deliberate, measured, almost cautious. There is no room for error this time, not because the action itself is difficult, but because the meaning behind it has changed. It is no longer just a task. It is a demonstration, a test of understanding. The observers remain silent, but attentive. Their eyes follow every movement, not with judgment, but with focus. They are not there to interfere, only to witness. Their presence transforms the act into something more than personal. It becomes part of the collective memory. The task continues. Slowly, step by step, the process unfolds. Each action aligns with what was described the night before. Each detail is placed correctly, each movement completed with intention. There is no rushing, no hesitation. Time seems to stretch again. Minutes feel longer, as if the world itself is allowing space for this to happen properly. Nothing interrupts. Even the distant sounds of daily life seem to soften, as if respecting the moment. Finally, it is done. They step back slightly, not fully turning away, but creating a small distance between themselves and the completed action. There is no immediate reaction from the observers. They remain still, taking in what they have seen. Then one of them nods. A small movement, almost imperceptible, but significant. It signals that the first part of the process has been completed. Not perfectly, perhaps, but sufficiently. The correction has been made. The weight shifts, just slightly, not lifted, not removed, but changed. The burden is no longer about what was done wrong, but about what comes next. The process moves forward, step by step, each phase connected to the last. They turn to leave. The walk back feels different from the walk there. Not lighter exactly, but more defined. There is a sense of movement now, of progression. The path is still long, but it is no longer uncertain. As they approach the settlement again, more people are visible. Daily life has fully resumed. Tasks are being carried out, conversations happening quietly, routines continuing. And yet, beneath it all, there is awareness. A shared understanding that something is unfolding. The two observers separate from them, without a word. Their role in this part is complete. They return to their own responsibilities, carrying with them the memory of what they have witnessed. That memory will matter later, when the process reaches its final stage. The person continues alone, but not truly alone, because now every step they take is part of something larger. Every action is being interpreted within the context of what has already happened. The separation phase has not yet begun, but its presence can already be felt. They return to their dwelling once more. This time, they enter without hesitation. Inside, the space feels slightly more familiar again, but not entirely. There is still a distance, a subtle shift that will not fully disappear until the process is complete, until balance is restored. They sit again by the fire, but this time the fire is stronger, not because anything has changed physically, but because their attention to it has. Small actions, adding fuel, adjusting placement, are done more carefully now. Awareness has sharpened, shaped by what they have experienced. Outside, the day continues, uninterrupted, steady, almost indifferent. But within that steady rhythm, one journey moves forward, quiet but significant. A journey shaped not by choice, but by the rules that define this world. And though the first step has been taken, many still remain. The sun climbs higher, and with it, the ordinary rhythm of the settlement strengthens. Sounds grow clearer, tools striking against wood, footsteps moving with purpose, low voices exchanging necessary words. Everything appears as it always does, yet for one person, every detail feels newly sharpened. They remain seated for a while, watching the fire, letting the quiet settle around them again. The first step has been completed, but there is no sense of relief, only transition. The process moves forward whether they are ready or not. Eventually, they stand. There is no signal given, no announcement made, yet the next phase has already begun. Separation does not start with distance alone. It begins with subtle shifts. Small changes in routine, in interaction, in presence. These changes are not forced loudly. They emerge naturally, guided by shared understanding. As they step outside, the difference becomes clearer. A few people glance at them briefly, then look away, not out of rejection, but out of awareness. Conversations pause for a moment as they pass, then continue again once they are gone. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, yet the shift is unmistakable. They walk toward the area where daily tasks are usually shared. Normally, they would join in without hesitation, taking their place among others, contributing as expected. But today, there is a pause, a brief moment where they stand at the edge, uncertain not of what to do, but of whether they should do it. The answer comes without words. One of the elders, standing nearby, makes a small gesture. Not a command, not a dismissal, just a quiet indication that this space is not theirs for now. It is not exclusion in anger, but part of the structure that has already been set in motion. They nod slightly and step back. There is no resistance, no attempt to question. The rules are clear, even when they are not spoken directly. And in this phase, understanding those unspoken boundaries is just as important as following the spoken ones. They turn and walk in another direction. The settlement feels larger now, not because it has changed, but because their place within it has shifted. Paths that once felt central now feel distant. Spaces that were once shared now feel observed from the outside. Time moves differently during separation. It stretches, not in the same way as during the night by the fire, but in a quieter, more persistent manner. Each moment is filled with awareness, with the constant recognition of what is missing, rather than what is present. They find themselves near the outer edge again, not by plan, but by instinct. It is a place where fewer people gather, where the noise of daily life softens. Here, the boundary between the settlement and the open land feels more visible, more defined. They sit not because they are told to, but because there is little else to do. This is part of the process as well. Not idleness, but reflection. In this world, reflection is not something that is spoken about often. Yet, it is built into the structure of these moments. The absence of routine creates space, and in that space, thoughts begin to shift. They think again about the mistake, not in the same way as before. The sharp edge of uncertainty has softened, replaced by something more stable. The act is clearer now, not just in what was done, but in why it mattered. Understanding grows slowly, not forced, not immediate, but steady. It comes from repetition, from quiet observation, from the absence of distraction. And as it grows, so does something else, a subtle change in how they see themselves within the larger pattern. The sun continues its path across the sky. Hours pass, marked only by the shifting light and the gradual change in sounds from the settlement behind them. Work continues, meals are prepared, conversations rise and fall. Life does not stop for one person's journey, and that, too, is part of the lesson. The world does not pause for mistakes. It continues, steady and indifferent, reminding everyone that their role within it must be maintained, not assumed. Presence must be earned again, even if it was once given freely. As the afternoon deepens, someone approaches, not quickly, not directly. Their path curves slightly, as if giving space even in approach. It is an older figure, not one of the elders who spoke before, but someone who carries quiet experience in their movements. They stop a short distance away. For a moment, neither speaks. Then the older figure sits as well, not facing directly, but slightly angled. This position matters. It is neither confrontational nor distant. It creates a shared space without forcing interaction. When they finally speak, their voice is soft, not instructing, not correcting, but observing. They mention something simple, perhaps about the day, the weather, the work being done elsewhere. It is not directly related to the process, yet it is not unrelated either. The conversation, if it can be called that, remains light, but beneath it, there is something deeper. A quiet guidance offered without being named. A reminder that separation is not abandonment, that presence can still exist in different forms. The person listens. They respond occasionally, carefully, but without tension. This interaction feels different from the structured moments before. It is not part of the formal process, yet it supports it in a way that cannot be easily defined. After some time, the older figure stands. There is no conclusion to the exchange, no final words. They simply nod once and leave, returning toward the settlement with the same measured pace. Their presence fades, but its effect remains. The sun begins to lower. Light softens again, shadows lengthen, and the air cools slightly. Another transition approaches, not as intense as the one before, but significant in its own way. The day is moving toward evening, and with it, the next stage draws closer. They remain where they are for a while longer. There is no urgency to move, no expectation that they must return immediately. The separation continues until it is complete, not until it becomes comfortable. Comfort is not the goal here. Understanding is. Eventually, they stand again. Their movements are slower now, not from hesitation, but from a deeper awareness of each step. They begin walking back toward the settlement, following a familiar path that now feels slightly altered once more. As they enter, the atmosphere shifts again, not as sharply as before, but noticeably. People are preparing for the evening, gathering near fires, bringing the day to a close. The rhythms of night begin to return, echoing the patterns from before. Yet this night will not be the same, because the process is not yet complete. They move quietly through the settlement, keeping to the edges, avoiding spaces where they would normally belong. This is not avoidance out of fear, but adherence to what has been set. Each choice now carries meaning. They reach their dwelling once more. Inside, the fire waits, ready to be tended. They kneel again, repeating the small actions that have begun to anchor them, adjusting, feeding, maintaining. These simple tasks now feel more significant than before. Outside, voices rise and fall around the central fire, the same place where everything began, the same place where in time everything will be resolved. But that moment has not yet come. For now, the separation continues, quiet and steady, shaping understanding in ways that cannot be rushed. And as the night settles in once again, the path forward remains clear. Not easy, but clear. The second night arrives more gently than the first, yet it carries a different kind of weight. The fear that once filled the air has softened, replaced by something steadier, an awareness that the process is unfolding exactly as it should. Still, nothing feels light. Inside the dwelling, the fire burns a little stronger than before. Its glow spreads across the walls, casting familiar shadows that no longer feel as distant. The person sits close, watching the flames rise and fall, noticing details that once went ignored. Every crackle, every shift in the wood, every small movement of heat feels meaningful now. It is no longer just a source of warmth, but something to observe, to understand. Even this simple act of tending the fire has become part of a larger awareness. Outside, the sounds of the settlement gather once again near the central space. Voices are present, though still controlled, still measured. Laughter appears briefly here and there, but never grows too loud, never fully escapes the boundaries that hold it. The person does not join them. That absence is no longer surprising. It has begun to settle into something expected. Yet even in absence, there is connection. The distance does not erase belonging, it only reshapes it, temporarily placing it just out of reach. They lean slightly forward, adding a small piece of wood to the fire. The motion is slow, careful, intentional. It reflects the change that has been building quietly since the night before. Nothing is done without thought now. Every action carries a subtle awareness of consequence. Time passes, though it is difficult to measure. Without the usual rhythm of shared tasks and interactions, the hours stretch differently. The night feels longer, yet not as tense. There is space now, space to think, to notice, to exist without constant movement. At some point, a faint sound reaches them. Footsteps again, but unlike the night before, these steps do not carry the same weight. They are lighter, slower, less formal. Still, they are not random. Movement at this hour always has purpose, even if that purpose is quiet. The person looks toward the entrance, but does not rise. A shadow appears briefly, then pauses just outside. For a moment, it seems as though whoever is there might enter, but they do not. Instead, they remain just beyond the threshold, neither fully present nor completely absent. A voice follows, low and calm. Not an elder, not an authority, just someone from the settlement. Their words are simple, almost ordinary. A brief mention of something happening nearby, perhaps a task completed, perhaps a small detail of the evening. It is not a message. It is a connection. The person listens, responding quietly. The exchange is short, without depth or complexity, yet it carries meaning. It reminds them that separation does not mean silence, that even within distance, there are threads that remain. The shadow eventually moves away. Footsteps fade, blending back into the quiet of the night. The person returns their attention to the fire, but something has shifted slightly. The space feels less isolated, even if nothing visible has changed. They sit a little longer, then finally allow themselves to rest. Sleep comes more easily this time, not completely free of thought, but softer, less fragmented. The images that return are calmer, less intense. The fire, the path, the voices, they remain, but they no longer press as heavily against the mind. Morning arrives again, as steady as before. Light filters in slowly, bringing with it the sounds of another day beginning. The person wakes without hesitation, their body already adjusting to this new rhythm. There is no confusion now about what must be done. The separation continues, but it is no longer unfamiliar. They step outside, the cool air brushing against their skin. The settlement moves around them as always, people engaged in their tasks, conversations flowing in low tones. The pattern repeats, yet feels slightly altered. Fewer glances now, or perhaps the same number, but perceived differently. Awareness remains, but it is no longer sharp or immediate. It has softened into something more stable, more integrated into the background of daily life. They walk once more toward the outer edge. The path feels shorter today, or perhaps they have simply grown used to it. Repetition has a way of shaping perception, turning what once felt distant into something more familiar, more manageable. They sit again in a similar place, not by instruction, but by choice. The quiet here has become part of the process, a space where thoughts settle more easily. The absence of constant activity allows something deeper to form. Time moves forward. The sun rises higher, shadows shift, and the sounds of the settlement continue their steady rhythm. The person watches, listens, and gradually, something else begins to emerge, a sense of clarity that was not present before. The mistake is no longer just something that happened. It becomes something understood, not fully, not perfectly, but enough to see its place within the larger pattern. Enough to recognize how small actions connect to larger consequences, how individual choices ripple outward. This understanding does not arrive suddenly. It builds slowly, layer by layer, shaped by observation and reflection. And as it builds, the weight of the process begins to change again, not lighter, but more defined, more purposeful. Later in the day, the same older figure returns. Their approach is just as measured as before, their presence just as quiet. They sit again at a slight angle, creating that same shared space without forcing interaction. The pattern repeats, but not exactly. This time, the conversation shifts slightly. Still simple, still indirect, but carrying a different tone. There is a hint of acknowledgement, a subtle recognition of progress. Not spoken directly, but present in the way the words are chosen. The person listens carefully. They respond with more ease now, less tension in their voice, less hesitation in their thoughts. The distance between them and the world around them feels smaller, even if the structure of separation remains. The older figure eventually stands once more. A nod, as before, marks the end of the exchange. No conclusion is stated, no lesson declared. Everything remains within the quiet language of presence and absence, action and observation. As the figure leaves, the person remains seated for a while longer. The day begins to shift toward evening again, the light softening, the air cooling. Another cycle is nearing its end, bringing them closer to the final stage, though it has not yet arrived. They stand slowly. The walk back toward the settlement feels different once more. There is a steadiness now, a sense of alignment that was not present before. Each step feels more certain, more grounded within the path they are following. As they enter the settlement, the atmosphere feels more familiar, not entirely restored, but closer. The distance that once felt sharp now feels softer, less defined. People move around them without pausing as much. Conversations continue without interruption. The separation is still there, but it is beginning to loosen. They return to their dwelling again, tending the fire as they have learned to do more carefully. The small actions continue, each one reinforcing the awareness that has grown over these past 2 days. Outside, the central fire begins to gather people once more. The same place where the process began, the same place where it will soon reach its conclusion. And though that moment has not yet come, its presence can already be felt, quiet, steady, approaching. Because in this world, nothing remains unfinished, and the journey that began with a single mistake is moving, step by step, toward its end. The third evening settles in with a quiet sense of inevitability. The light fades more slowly than before, stretching the final moments of the day as if allowing everything to align. There is no sudden shift, no sharp tension, only a gradual movement towards something that has been waiting. Inside the dwelling, the fire burns steadily, no longer weak or uncertain. Its glow feels balanced now, neither too dim nor too strong. The person sits beside it, not watching as intensely as before, but still aware of its presence in a deeper, more settled way. There is less restlessness in their posture. Where once there was stiffness, there is now stillness. Not the kind forced by uncertainty, but one that comes from understanding the rhythm of what is happening. The process has shaped them, quietly and consistently. Outside, the the sounds of the settlement begin to gather again. Voices rise, footsteps move toward the center, and the familiar pattern of evening returns. But this time, there is something different beneath it, a subtle anticipation, shared but unspoken, moving through the air like a faint current. The person stands before they are called, not out of impatience, but because they understand. The next step does not need to be announced. It arrives naturally, as part of the structure that has guided everything so far. They step outside. The air feels cooler, carrying the scent of fire and earth. The path toward the center is lit by the growing glow of the central flame, which burns brighter tonight, as if prepared for what is to come. As they walk, they notice something new. The glances from others are no longer as distant. They are still present, still aware, but softer. Less about observation, more about acknowledgement. The shift is subtle, but unmistakable. They reach the central fire. The circle has formed again, similar to the first night, yet not identical. The positions are slightly different, the spacing adjusted, the atmosphere changed. This is not a repetition, it is a continuation. The same three figures stand nearby. Their presence is steady, unchanged, anchoring the moment within the familiar structure. The elder stands at the edge of the firelight, their face illuminated just enough to be seen clearly. The person steps into the center without being guided. That small difference matters. It shows that the process has moved forward, that the role is now understood rather than imposed. Even this simple act carries meaning within the larger pattern. Silence settles over the group, not heavy, not tense, but focused. The kind of silence that gathers attention rather than suppresses it. Every movement slows. Every breath feels more noticeable. The elder begins to speak. Their voice is the same as before, steady, measured, calm. But the tone has shifted slightly. There is less emphasis on disruption, more on restoration. The words reflect the journey that has taken place over the past days. They recount what has been done, the mistake, the correction, the separation. Each part is acknowledged, not as separate events, but as connected steps. The narrative is being completed, shaped into something that can be understood as a whole. The person listens, their gaze steady. There is no need to look away now. The weight that once pressed down has changed into something else, something more balanced, more aligned. The process has not removed responsibility, but it has transformed it. The elder pauses. Then they ask a question, not the same as before. This one is different. It is not about what was done, but about what has been understood. It invites reflection, not explanation. A moment to speak from within the process, rather than about it. The person answers slowly. Their voice is quiet, but clearer than before. They speak not just of the action, but of its place within the larger order. Their words are simple, but carry a depth that was not present at the beginning. No one interrupts. The response is allowed to stand on its own, to settle into the space between those gathered. It is not judged immediately. It is received, considered, absorbed into the shared awareness of the group. One of the three figures steps forward slightly. Again, the movement is small, but meaningful. It signals that the final stage is approaching, not an ending in the usual sense, but a completion, a return to balance that has been carefully built. The elder nods. Then they speak the final part, the act of restoration. It is described clearly, though it is not complex. A shared action, something that involves both the individual and the community. It must be visible, something that others can witness, not just understand. The person listens carefully. There is no hesitation now, no uncertainty. The steps are clear, and more importantly, they make sense within everything that has come before. The process feels complete, even before the final act is carried out. They move forward. The circle opens slightly, creating space not by force, but by agreement. The fire burns steadily at the center, its light reflecting in the eyes of those gathered. The moment feels contained, held within a structure that has guided it from the beginning. The act begins. It is simple in form, yet layered in meaning. Each movement is deliberate, each gesture aligned with what has been described. The person carries it out without rushing, without hesitation, fully present in the moment. Those watching remain still. Their role is not to intervene, but to witness. The act belongs to the individual, yet its meaning belongs to everyone. It is shared, even in its simplicity. Time stretches once more, not in tension, but in focus. The world narrows to this single sequence of actions, held within the light of the fire and the attention of those present. Then it is complete. The person steps back. There is no immediate reaction, no applause, no outward sign of approval. The silence returns, but it feels different now, lighter, more open, as if something has been released. The elder looks around the circle. Their gaze moves slowly, acknowledging those present, then returns to the center. They nod once, a small but decisive movement that carries the weight of conclusion. The process is finished, not erased, not forgotten, but completed. The three figures step back fully now. Their presence shifts, no longer framing the moment, but blending back into the group. The structure dissolves quietly, leaving behind only the shared understanding of what has taken place. The circle loosens. People begin to move again, slowly at first, then more naturally. Conversations return, soft at first, then growing slightly stronger. The tension that once filled the space has faded into something calmer. The person remains still for a moment longer, not because they are required to, but because they are taking in the shift. The change is subtle, yet unmistakable. The distance that once surrounded them is gone. They are no longer separate. They step out of the center. This time, the space does not hold them apart. It allows them to pass through it, to return to the flow of the settlement. The movement feels natural, unforced, as if it has always been this way. Someone nearby meets their gaze. There is no judgment there, no lingering tension, just acknowledgement. A quiet recognition that the process has been completed, that balance has been restored. The fire continues to burn, but now it is just a fire again, not a focal point of tension or decision, but part of the ordinary rhythm of life. Its light spreads across faces that no longer hold the same weight as before. The person walks away from the center, not to the edges, not to isolation, but back into the paths they once followed. The settlement feels familiar again, not because it has changed, but because their place within it has been restored. The night continues, steady, calm, uninterrupted, and though the memory of what has happened will remain, it will no longer define each moment. It will become part of the larger pattern, something that exists without dominating, because in this world, mistakes are not the end. They are part of the structure, and when that structure is followed, step by step, with care and understanding, even the heaviest moments can find their place again within the balance of everything else. The journey that began in quiet fear has now come to rest in quiet resolution, and life, as it always does, moves forward. The night after restoration feels different in a way that is difficult to describe at first. Nothing in the settlement has changed on the surface, yet the atmosphere carries a quieter stability, as if something previously unsettled has finally settled into place. The fires burn as they always do, scattered across the settlement in familiar points of light. People move between them with ease again, their voices returning to normal rhythm. The absence that once existed around one person is no longer present in the same way. Inside the dwelling, the fire is small but steady. The person sits near it without the heaviness that once followed them. There is still awareness of what happened, but it no longer presses down with the same intensity. Instead, it sits within memory, integrated rather than isolated. Sleep comes earlier than before, not because of exhaustion, but because the mind no longer resists rest. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer spiral or repeat endlessly. They move, settle, and fade in a more natural rhythm. Morning arrives, softly once again. The light enters gradually, touching the edges of the settlement before reaching the center. Sounds begin to rise, work resuming, tools moving, people speaking in low tones. Life continues in its ordinary form. When the person steps outside, there is no hesitation. Their movement feels more natural now, less conscious of every detail. The path they take is no longer marked by separation or distance. It is simply part of the settlement again. As they walk through the familiar spaces, They notice subtle differences, not in the environment, but in how they are perceived. There are no lingering pauses in conversation, no adjusted distances in movement. Everything flows as it did before, yet with a quiet recognition. A few people glance in their direction, but the glances are normal now. Brief, neutral, part of everyday awareness rather than observation. The change is not spoken, but it is understood. They reach the shared work area. This time, there is no pause at the edge. They step into the space naturally, taking their place among others. The movement feels simple, yet it carries meaning that is understood without explanation. Someone nearby offers a tool without speaking. It is a small gesture, but it signals reintegration more clearly than words could. The task begins, and the rhythm of work resumes around them without disruption. Hours pass in steady continuity. The day is structured by activity, conversation, and shared effort. Nothing feels unusual anymore. The earlier phases of the process feel distant, not forgotten, but no longer immediate. Evening approaches gradually. Shadows lengthen, and the settlement begins to slow its pace. People begin returning toward central fires again, gathering as they always do when the day nears its end. The person follows this movement naturally, not as an observer, but as a participant. There is no separation in the path they take now. Their steps align with the flow of everyone else. When they reach the central area, the atmosphere is calm. The fire burns steadily, surrounded by small groups engaged in quiet conversation. The tone is lighter than before, though still measured. There is no tension in the air. Someone speaks to them casually. A simple exchange about the day's work. Nothing significant, nothing formal. The conversation is brief, but it happens without hesitation. That alone marks the change more clearly than anything else. The person responds in the same tone. There is no effort required to match the interaction. It feels natural again, as if the distance that once existed has fully dissolved into the background of memory. As the night deepens, the gathering slowly disperses. People return to their dwellings, one by one, in no particular order. The movement is unstructured, comfortable, familiar. There is no sense of observation or separation. The person remains near the fire for a while longer, not out of necessity, but out of quiet habit. The warmth is steady, the light familiar. It is no longer symbolic, it is simply part of the night. Eventually, they stand and walk back. The path feels exactly as it did before the process began. Not unchanged in reality, but unchanged in feeling. The settlement has returned to its ordinary state. Inside the dwelling, everything is as it was. The fire is smaller now, requiring attention again. They tend to it without thought, repeating the familiar motions that define the end of each day. Outside, the settlement settles into full night. Voices fade, movement slows, and the fires become the primary source of light. The rhythm of life returns to its quietest form. There is no final ceremony, no announcement of completion, only continuation. The process that once defined every moment now exists only as memory, integrated into the larger structure of experience. It is no longer active, but it remains part of understanding. The person sits by the fire. Their thoughts are calmer now, less fragmented. They do not return repeatedly to the events with tension, but with clarity. Each stage is seen as part of a sequence that had purpose and structure. Understanding replaces uncertainty. Not all questions are answered, but not all need to be. What remains is a clearer sense of place within the system they are part of. The night deepens further. The settlement is almost entirely quiet now, save for the occasional movement of wind or distant shifting of wood in fires. The world feels stable again, held in its familiar balance. Sleep arrives naturally, not as escape, but as continuation. The mind moves into rest without resistance, carrying only faint traces of thought that dissolve quickly into stillness. Morning will come again, as it always does, and with it, the repetition of life work, interaction, rhythm, structure. Nothing dramatic, nothing final, just the ongoing cycle that defines existence here. But something subtle has changed, not in the world, but in understanding. Because once a process like this is lived through, it becomes part of how everything else is seen. Not as punishment alone, not as correction alone, but as structure, quiet, consistent, unavoidable. And in that structure, life continues, steady, measured, and complete in its own way. The settlement wakes again with its usual rhythm, but there is a subtle difference in how everything feels. Not visible, not spoken, but present in the way people move with slightly more ease around one another. Life has returned fully to its normal flow, as if the entire process has been folded quietly into memory. The morning firelight spreads across the ground in soft tones. Smoke rises gently from cooking fires, and the smell of grain and baked food fills the air. Conversations begin earlier today, more relaxed than before, as if something unspoken has eased between people. The person moves through the settlement without hesitation. Their steps are no longer measured by awareness of separation or observation. Instead, they blend into the daily rhythm naturally. Tasks begin to form around them again, not assigned formally, but through shared habit. A tool is passed into their hand without instruction. They take it, begin work, and fall into the rhythm that others around them already follow. The sound of coordinated activity fills the space, wood being shaped, materials being moved, small instructions exchanged casually. There is no mention of the past days, not because they are forgotten, but because they are no longer the focus. The structure of daily life has absorbed them, placed them where they belong within the broader flow of time. At midday, the sun grows stronger over the settlement. Shadows shorten, and activity continues at a steady pace. People gather briefly to eat, sitting in small groups near the edges of work areas. The atmosphere is calm, ordinary, stable. The person sits among them. No one creates distance. No one emphasizes difference. The interaction is simple, natural. A shared moment that requires no explanation or reflection beyond itself. A short conversation begins nearby. Nothing important, just observations about work, weather, and small changes in tasks. The kind of talk that fills most of the day. The person listens, then responds without hesitation when spoken to directly. The ease of it is noticeable, not in a dramatic sense, but in its absence of tension. What once felt layered with awareness now feels direct again. Simple interaction has returned to its normal form. After the break, work resumes. The group disperses smoothly, each returning to their tasks without instruction. The person follows along naturally, moving into their role as part of the larger system once more. Time moves forward in steady repetition. Hours pass without distinction. The structure of the day remains consistent: work, pause, movement, continuation. Nothing interrupts the flow. Everything fits within its expected place. As afternoon begins to fade, the light softens again. The settlement slowly transitions toward evening, and the rhythm shifts with it. Tools are set aside gradually, not all at once, but in a natural winding down of activity. The person finishes their task without delay. There is no urgency to leave, no hesitation to stay. The action is simply completed and then released. That simplicity itself feels different from the days before. They walk back toward the central area with others. The movement is collective, unspoken, familiar. People drift toward the fire spaces where the evening will gather. There is no formation, no instruction, just shared direction. The central fire is already burning when they arrive. Its light is steady, illuminating faces without drawing attention. Groups form loosely around it, some speaking, others simply sitting. The tone is relaxed, without weight. The person sits among them again. No space is reserved or separated. No awareness of past structure remains in the arrangement. The group exists as it did before everything began. A familiar voice greets them casually. A brief comment about the day's work. Nothing more. The exchange is light, almost routine. The response comes easily, without thought or preparation. Another conversation follows nearby. Fragments of discussion overlap slightly plans for tomorrow. Observations about tools, small remarks about seasonal changes. The sound of community fills the space again. The person listens, then joins briefly when needed. Their voice fits naturally into the flow. There is no interruption in tone, no sense of distance. Everything functions as part of the same ongoing rhythm. As night begins to settle, the fire becomes more central. Its glow grows stronger against the darkening sky. People sit closer now, forming a loose circle without structure or formality. The atmosphere is calm, familiar, lived in. No one speaks about what happened days ago, not because it is forbidden, but because it is no longer active in the present. It exists as completed history, already absorbed into understanding. The person looks at the fire for a while, not deeply, not intensely, just present. The flames move steadily, unchanged, indifferent to everything that has passed around them. The evening continues without interruption. Gradually, people begin to leave, one by one, returning to their dwellings. The departure is unstructured, smooth, without conclusion, just natural ending. The person stands and leaves as well. The path back feels ordinary now, familiar, unchanged, steady. The settlement no longer feels divided in perception. Everything is part of one continuous space again. Inside the dwelling, the fire is ready to be tended. They add wood, adjust the flame, and sit down without delay. The motions are automatic, part of a rhythm that has returned fully to its place. Outside, the settlement quiets. Night spreads across the land again, covering the structures, softening the edges of movement and sound. The world settles into rest. There is no lingering tension, no sense of unresolved weight, only continuity. The person sits quietly for a while, then rests. Sleep comes easily, without resistance or interruption. Thoughts pass through briefly, then dissolve. The mind no longer holds onto fragments of process or transition. Morning will come again, and with it, the repetition of life work, interaction, rhythm, time moving forward in steady motion. But something remains, not as burden, not as disruption, but as quiet understanding. A recognition of how structure shapes experience, how actions carry meaning beyond their moment. And within that understanding, life continues, not changed in appearance, but changed in awareness. Morning arrives again, but this time it feels even more ordinary than before. There is no sense of transition left between days, only continuity. The settlement wakes as it always does, with soft movement and familiar sound filling the air. The firelight inside the dwelling has nearly faded, leaving only warm embers. The person stirs awake without delay, not pulled by urgency, but simply following the natural rhythm that has returned to them. Everything feels aligned again with the flow of daily life. Outside, the sky is pale and steady. Clouds drift slowly across the horizon, and the settlement begins its usual activity. Smoke rises from cooking fires, and people move between spaces with practiced ease. The structure of the day begins to form without instruction. The person steps outside without hesitation. There is no pause at thresholds anymore, no lingering sense of separation. Their movement blends into the environment naturally, as if nothing had ever disrupted it. The path forward feels familiar and uninterrupted. They join the flow of people heading toward work. Tools are already being gathered, conversations already beginning. The rhythm of cooperation resumes quickly, without effort. Everyone seems to know what must be done without needing to be reminded. A familiar task is assigned through gesture alone. No explanation is given. None is needed. The person accepts it and begins immediately, falling into the shared pace of the group. The sound of coordinated labor fills the space again. Wood is shaped, materials are moved, and structures take form slowly under steady effort. Each movement feels simple, almost automatic. The repetition of action no longer feels heavy. Instead, it becomes part of something larger and stable. Time moves forward without interruption. Hours pass in quiet continuity. There is no moment that stands out, no break in rhythm. Everything flows evenly from one action to the next. At some point, conversation begins nearby. It is light, unstructured, focused on immediate concerns. Someone mentions a small change in supply. Another responds with a suggestion. The exchange is practical, unburdened. The person joins briefly. Their voice fits naturally into the conversation, neither forced nor hesitant. Words come easily, as if there had never been distance between them and this kind of interaction. No one reacts differently toward them. There is no visible reminder of past events. No change in treatment, no lingering separation. Everything exists within the normal rhythm of shared work and speech. As midday approaches, the sun grows stronger overhead. Heat spreads gently across the settlement, and activity slows slightly as people take a short rest. The movement becomes softer, more relaxed, though still steady. The person sits with others in a shaded area. Food is shared simply, without arrangement or formality. The group sits close enough to speak easily, but not structured in any strict formation. The atmosphere remains calm and familiar. A brief exchange happens about the weather. Someone comments on the changing season. Another agrees. It is the kind of conversation that carries no weight beyond the moment itself. The person listens, then responds briefly. The interaction ends naturally and fades into silence. No conclusion is marked, no emphasis placed. It simply becomes part of the ongoing flow of the day. After the break, work resumes again. People return to their tasks without instruction. The transition is smooth, almost invisible. The structure of the day continues without disruption. The person returns to their assigned work. Their movements are steady and confident now. Each action feels placed correctly within the rhythm of the group. There is no hesitation or adjustment needed. As the afternoon progresses, shadows begin to lengthen. The light shifts gradually, signaling the slow movement toward evening. The settlement responds automatically, winding down its activities in stages. Work becomes lighter, slower. Tools are set aside one by one. Conversations become more frequent, but softer in tone. The energy of the day begins to settle. The person completes their final task without delay. There is no urgency, only completion. The action fits neatly into the closing rhythm of the day, as naturally as the beginning had done. People begin moving toward the central area again. The motion is not organized, but shared. A collective awareness draws everyone toward the fire as evening approaches. The central fire is already burning steadily. Its glow is warm and consistent, illuminating familiar faces and spaces. The group gathers loosely around it, forming clusters rather than structure. The person takes a place among them without thought. There is no awareness of position or distance anymore. Only presence within the group, equal and unmarked. A casual greeting is exchanged nearby. It is simple, routine, part of everyday interaction. The response is equally light, without hesitation or reflection. More conversations form around the fire. Small topics, shared observations, quiet remarks about the day. The atmosphere is calm, stable, and unremarkable in the most natural way. The person listens without effort. There is no need to interpret meaning beyond what is said. Everything exists at surface level again, direct and uncomplicated. As the night deepens, the fire becomes the center of attention. Its movement is steady, its light constant. People sit comfortably around it, some speaking, others simply resting in silence. The person remains seated for a while, not out of obligation, but because the moment feels complete as it is. There is no tension pulling them elsewhere, no sense of separation. Gradually, people begin to leave again. One by one, they return to their dwellings. The departure is natural, unstructured, part of the ending rhythm of the day. The person stands and follows. The path back is familiar now, in a way that feels complete. Not just known, but integrated into their understanding of daily life. Inside the dwelling, the fire waits quietly. They tend to it without thought, repeating simple motions that maintain warmth and light. The act feels grounded, part of a stable routine. Outside, the settlement grows quiet again. Night settles fully, covering movement and sound in calm stillness. The world returns to rest, unchanged and steady. There is no lingering weight left behind. No sense of process or transition remains active in the present. Everything has returned to continuity. The person sits by the fire. Their thoughts are calm, unforced. They do not circle around past events. Instead, they remain in the present moment. Sleep comes naturally once more, without interruption, without resistance. The mind releases itself into rest as part of the same steady rhythm that defines everything else. Another day will come, and it will follow the same pattern as all days do here: work, rest, gathering, silence, movement. A continuous cycle that does not break, only repeats. But now, it is no longer heavy. It is simply life. The settlement feels fully alive again as the new day begins, not in a dramatic sense, but in its quiet consistency. The rhythm has become so familiar now that it almost disappears into the background of awareness, leaving only action and presence. Morning light spreads evenly across the structures, revealing the same paths, the same gathering points, the same movement of people starting their routines. Everything continues as it always has, without interruption or hesitation. The person wakes without delay, their body already aligned with the flow of the day. There is no lingering thought from the night before, no weight carried forward. Sleep and rest have done their work completely, leaving the mind clear and steady. Outside, the air is cool and still. Small groups are already forming, voices low and practical. Tools are being prepared, tasks quietly organized through habit rather than instruction. The system functions through repetition now, not urgency. The person steps out and joins the movement naturally. There is no separation, no pause between self and environment. They are simply part of the same structure that everyone else is moving through. A familiar task begins again, not assigned formally, but understood through routine. Hands reach for tools, materials are positioned, and work resumes in steady coordination. The sound of activity spreads through the settlement. Wood being cut, surfaces shaped, objects formed with care and repetition. Each action contributes to something larger, though no one speaks of it directly. Time moves forward in an even flow. There are no marked moments that stand out sharply anymore. Everything blends from one stage into the next, creating a continuous rhythm of effort and rest. At one point, conversation emerges nearby. It is simple and practical, focused on the immediate needs of the day. Someone mentions a task adjustment. Another responds with agreement. The exchange is brief and natural. The person joins in without thought. Their voice blends easily with others. There is no sense of hesitation or distance in interaction. Communication feels direct again, unburdened by reflection. No one treats them differently. Everything functions within the same shared understanding. The past no longer creates separation in present interaction. As midday approaches, the sun becomes stronger. Heat spreads across the open areas, and activity slows slightly. People take short pauses, gathering in shaded areas to rest and eat. The person sits among others again. Food is shared without structure or ceremony. The atmosphere is relaxed, focused only on the moment itself. Small conversations continue in the background. A comment is made about the work progress. Someone notes improvement in output. Another agrees briefly. There is no emphasis, only acknowledgement. The observation passes through the group and fades. The person listens quietly. They do not need to add much. Presence itself is enough within this shared space. After the break, work resumes once more. The transition is seamless, almost invisible. People rise and return to their tasks without needing direction. The person follows the same rhythm. Their movements are steady, efficient, aligned with those around them. There is no disruption in flow. Hours pass with consistent repetition. The settlement continues its cycle of activity without pause. Nothing interrupts the structure of the day. As afternoon begins to soften, the light changes again. Shadows stretch gently across the ground, signaling the slow approach of evening. The pace of work begins to ease naturally. Tools are set down gradually. There is no sudden stop, only a slow reduction in activity. The end of the day arrives through shared understanding. The person completes their final task. There is no sense of urgency or completion pressure. The action simply concludes as part of the rhythm. People begin moving toward the central space. The movement is natural and collective, forming without instruction. Everyone shifts in the same direction as evening approaches. The central fire is already burning. Its glow is steady, warm, and familiar. It anchors the gathering without dominating it. The person takes a place among others. No attention is drawn. No separation exists. They are simply part of the group again. A few casual greetings are exchanged. Simple acknowledgments, brief and light. Nothing carries weight beyond the moment. Conversation spreads slowly around the fire. Topics remain ordinary daily tasks, small observations, plans for tomorrow. The tone is relaxed and stable. The person listens and occasionally responds. Their participation feels natural, without effort or tension. Everything flows easily within the shared space. As night settles deeper, the fire becomes the main focus. Its movement is steady, its light constant. People sit comfortably around it in quiet clusters. Silence appears between conversations. Not heavy silence, but peaceful gaps that feel normal and expected. The atmosphere is balanced and calm. The person remains seated for a while longer. There is no need to move, no sense of distance or separation. The moment is enough as it is. Gradually, people begin to leave. One by one, they return to their dwellings. The departure is unstructured, flowing naturally. The person stands and walks back as well. The path feels completely familiar now. Not just known, but integrated into routine awareness. Inside the dwelling, the fire is prepared. They tend to it with simple, practiced motions. The action requires no thought, only continuation. Outside, the settlement becomes quiet. Night spreads fully. and movement slows to near stillness. The world rests in its familiar state. There is no tension left in the air, no process, no separation, no transition remains active. Everything exists in continuity. The person sits near the fire. Thoughts are calm, steady, without repetition or weight. The mind is present, not pulled backward or forward. Sleep arrives naturally. No interruption, no resistance. The body and mind settle into rest as part of the same rhythm. Another day will follow, and it will mirror the same structure: movement, rest, interaction, silence. But now, it is no longer something being endured or observed. It is simply the way life continues. The settlement enters a new cycle of days that feels even more stable than before, as if time itself has learned the rhythm and no longer deviates from it. Nothing unusual interrupts the flow anymore, and even change arrives in such small steps that it barely registers. Morning light spreads across familiar paths, touching the same structures, the same gathering points, the same steady movement of people beginning their work. Everything feels continuous, without break or separation from what came before. The person wakes without hesitation, already aligned with the structure of the day. There is no need to adjust or reorient themselves. Their thoughts do not search for meaning or memory. They simply move forward with the present moment. Outside, the air is calm and slightly cool. The settlement is already active in its quiet way. People move with ease, carrying tools, preparing spaces, exchanging brief words that serve immediate purpose. The rhythm is uninterrupted. The person steps into this flow naturally. No one notices their arrival in any special way, and that is what makes it complete. They are fully part of the system again, indistinguishable in movement and role. Work begins as it always does. Hands engage with materials. Tasks unfold in steady repetition, and coordination happens without instruction. The structure of effort is shared rather than assigned. The sound of activity fills the settlement. It is not loud, but constant, wood shaping, tools striking, objects forming through repeated action. The sound itself becomes part of the background of life. Time moves without sharp edges. Hours pass without distinction, blending into one another. There are no interruptions or marked transitions that break the continuity. At one point, conversation rises nearby. It is practical and brief, focused on immediate needs. Someone mentions a resource adjustment. Another responds with agreement. The exchange is simple and resolved quickly. The person listens and adds a short response when needed. Their participation is natural, requiring no effort or thought beyond the moment. Communication flows easily again within the group. No sense of separation exists anymore. Interaction is uniform, shared equally among everyone present. The past no longer affects the present structure of engagement. As midday approaches, the light becomes stronger. Heat spreads gently across open areas, and activity slows slightly. People take brief pauses, gathering in shaded spaces to rest and eat. The person sits among others, without distinction. Food is shared simply, without formality. The atmosphere remains calm, focused on immediate presence rather than anything beyond it. A short exchange occurs about ongoing tasks. Someone comments on progress. Another acknowledges it briefly. There is no emphasis or evaluation, only recognition of continuity. The person listens quietly. Their presence is part of the group without effort. No attention is drawn. No distance exists between them and others. After rest, work resumes smoothly. The transition happens without instruction or pause. Everyone returns to their tasks as part of the same shared rhythm. The person follows the movement naturally. Their actions are steady, familiar, and aligned with those around them. The structure of the day continues without interruption. Hours pass again in repetition. The settlement maintains its steady rhythm of effort and coordination. Nothing disrupts the flow. Nothing alters the pattern. As afternoon begins to soften, the light shifts. Shadows grow longer, signaling the gradual movement toward evening. Activity begins to slow in response, not by command, but by shared understanding. Tools are set down one by one. Work transitions into completion naturally, without abrupt stopping. The end of effort arrives through collective rhythm. The person completes their final task. There is no urgency, no emphasis on finishing. The action concludes as part of the natural cycle. People begin moving toward the central area. The motion is shared and unstructured, forming through habit rather than instruction. Everyone shifts in the same direction as evening approaches. The central fire burns steadily. Its glow is constant, anchoring the space without demanding attention. It is simply there, as it always has been. The person joins the gathering without thought. There is no awareness of position or role. They are simply part of the group again, fully integrated into the shared space. A few greetings are exchanged casually. Simple acknowledgments, brief and familiar. Nothing carries weight beyond the moment itself. Conversation spreads gradually. Topics remain ordinary daily work, small changes, observations about the environment. The tone is relaxed and consistent. The person listens and responds when needed. Their voice blends into the group without hesitation or effort. Interaction feels entirely natural again. As night deepens, the fire becomes the center of attention. Its movement is steady, its light warm and stable. People sit in quiet clusters around it. Silence appears between conversations. It is not heavy, but comfortable. A natural part of shared presence rather than absence. The person remains seated for a while. There is no urgency to leave. no sense of separation or distance. The moment feels complete as it is. Gradually, people begin to leave. One by one, they return to their dwellings. The departure is smooth, without structure or conclusion. The person stands and follows. The path feels entirely familiar now. There is no sense of transition, only continuation. Inside the dwelling, the fire is tended. Simple actions maintain its warmth and light. The routine requires no thought, only repetition. Outside, the settlement quiets fully. Night settles over everything, softening movement and sound into stillness. The world rests in balance. There is no tension remaining anywhere. No process, no separation, no correction exists in the present moment. Everything has returned to continuity. The person sits near the fire. Their thoughts remain calm and steady. There is no pull toward past events or future concern. Sleep arrives naturally once more. The body and mind settle without resistance, returning to rest as part of the same rhythm that defines everything else. Another day will come again, and it will follow the same structure, steady, predictable, continuous, not as repetition that traps time, but as rhythm that sustains it. And within that rhythm, life simply continues. The settlement moves into another day with the same steady rhythm. But now, there is a deeper sense of continuity that feels almost unnoticeable unless closely observed. Nothing changes in structure, yet everything feels more settled, as if the entire community has fully aligned with its own pattern. Morning arrives without interruption. Light spreads gently across the familiar paths, touching the same structures and gathering spaces. Smoke rises from early fires, and the soft sound of movement begins to fill the air once more. The person wakes naturally. There is no delay, no resistance, no lingering thought from previous days. The mind rises with the body in complete alignment with the surrounding rhythm. Outside, the settlement is already active. People move with quiet purpose, preparing for work, exchanging brief words, and organizing tasks through habit rather than instruction. The structure of the day forms itself naturally. The person steps into this flow without hesitation. There is no separation between observer and participant anymore. Their presence is fully absorbed into the environment of shared activity. Work begins immediately. Hands engage with familiar tasks. Tools move with practiced precision, and coordination happens without verbal direction. Everything functions through repetition and understanding. The sound of labor fills the space again. It is steady and continuous, wood being shaped, materials adjusted, objects taking form through repeated effort. The sound itself becomes part of the atmosphere. Time moves forward evenly. There are no sudden shifts, no marked transitions. The day flows from one moment to the next without disruption or tension. At one point, conversation emerges nearby. It is simple and functional, focused on immediate concerns. Someone mentions a small adjustment in resources. Another responds briefly. The exchange ends without emphasis. The person joins when needed. Their voice fits easily into the shared communication. There is no hesitation or distance in interaction anymore. Everything feels balanced. No one stands apart. No one is isolated. The structure of daily life is fully restored and stable. As midday arrives, the sun grows stronger. Heat spreads gently across open areas, and activity slows slightly. People take short breaks in shaded spaces, resting and sharing food. The person sits among others again. There is no sense of separation or difference. The group exists as a single, unified presence within the moment. A brief conversation continues. Topics remain ordinary work progress, small observations, plans for the next task. The tone is calm and steady. The person listens without effort. Their participation is natural, requiring no thought beyond presence. Interaction flows without interruption. After rest, work resumes. The transition is smooth and unmarked. People return to their tasks as part of the same continuous rhythm. The person follows the movement. Their actions remain steady, aligned, and familiar. There is no resistance or hesitation in any motion. Hours pass in quiet repetition. The settlement continues its cycle of effort, coordination, and shared activity. Nothing disrupts the flow. As afternoon begins to soften, light changes again. Shadows stretch across the ground, signaling the gradual approach of evening. The pace of work begins to ease naturally. Tools are set aside gradually. There is no sudden stopping point, only a shared winding down of activity across the settlement. The person completes their final task. The action concludes without urgency or emphasis. It simply fits into the rhythm of the day. People begin moving toward the central fire. The movement is shared and natural, forming without instruction or structure. Everyone shifts together toward the evening gathering. The central fire burns steadily. Its glow is warm and constant, illuminating familiar faces and spaces without drawing focus away from anything else. The person joins the group without thought. There is no awareness of position or distance. They are fully part of the gathering again. Greetings are exchanged casually nearby. Simple acknowledgments, brief and familiar. Nothing carries weight beyond the moment itself. Conversation spreads slowly. Topics remain ordinary daily tasks, observations, simple reflections. The tone is relaxed and steady. The person listens and responds when needed. Their voice blends naturally into the group. Interaction is effortless and unmarked. As night deepens, the fire becomes the center. Its light is steady, its movement constant. People sit comfortably in loose clusters around it. Silence appears between conversations. not as absence, but as natural pause. The atmosphere remains calm and balanced. The person stays seated for a while. There is no urgency to move, no sense of distance or separation. Everything feels complete in the moment. Gradually, people begin to leave. One by one, they return to their dwellings. The movement is unstructured and smooth. The person stands and follows. The path back feels fully familiar now, part of the same continuous rhythm that defines each day. Inside, the fire is tended again. Simple actions maintain warmth and light. The routine continues without thought or effort. Outside, the settlement quiets. Night settles fully, and movement fades into stillness. The world rests in its steady balance. There is no tension left anywhere. No process remains active. No separation. No transition. Everything exists in continuity. The person sits quietly near the fire. Their thoughts are calm and unforced. The present moment is enough. Sleep arrives naturally. The mind and body settle into rest as part of the same ongoing rhythm of life. Another day will follow, and it will mirror the same pattern, steady, continuous, familiar, not as repetition without meaning, but as structure that holds everything in place. And within that structure, life simply continues. The settlement enters yet another day. And yet, it no longer feels like repetition in the way it once might have. Instead, it feels like continuity, an unbroken thread, where each moment naturally connects to the next without resistance or awareness of separation. Morning light spreads softly across the familiar environment. The same structures, the same pathways, the same gathering points come into view as they always do. Nothing appears different, yet everything feels stable in a way that no longer draws attention to itself. The person wakes with the same natural rhythm. There is no hesitation between sleep and waking, no lingering fragments of thought. Awareness returns smoothly, as if it had never fully left. Outside, movement has already begun. People are active, preparing for work, organizing materials, exchanging brief and practical words. The settlement functions through shared understanding rather than instruction. The person steps into this flow without pause. There is no sense of entering or leaving anything. They are simply part of what is already happening. Work begins as it always does. Hands move through familiar tasks. Tools are picked up and used with practiced precision. And coordination forms naturally among those working nearby. The sound of activity fills the space again. It is steady and consistent, wood being shaped, materials shifting, objects taking form through repetition and shared effort. Time continues without interruption. There are no distinct breaks that separate one moment from another. Everything flows in a single, continuous rhythm. At one point, a brief conversation forms nearby. It is focused on immediate concerns, adjustments in materials, Small observations about progress, simple acknowledgments. The exchange is quick and resolved. The person participates briefly. Their voice fits easily into the flow of communication. There is no need for thought or preparation before speaking. Interaction feels entirely normal now. There is no awareness of distance or separation between individuals. Everything functions within shared presence. As midday arrives, the sun becomes stronger. Heat spreads across open areas, and activity naturally slows. People gather in shaded spaces to rest and share food. The person sits among others. There is no distinction in placement or attention. The group exists as a single, unified presence in the moment. A small discussion continues. Someone mentions progress in work. Another responds briefly. The tone remains calm and unremarkable. The person listens quietly. There is no effort involved in participation or awareness. Everything feels natural and unforced. After the break, work resumes again. The transition is smooth and shared. No instruction is needed to signal the continuation of activity. The person returns to their task. Movements are steady and familiar. Each action fits into the rhythm of the group without disruption. Hours pass in quiet sequence. The settlement continues its cycle of effort and coordination without interruption or change. As afternoon begins to fade, light shifts again. Shadows lengthen slowly, signaling the natural approach of evening. Activity begins to reduce gradually. Tools are set aside one by one. Work concludes not through command, but through shared understanding of the day's end. The person completes their final task. There is no emphasis on completion. The action simply reaches its natural end within the rhythm of the day. People begin moving toward the central area. The movement is collective and unstructured, formed through habit rather than instruction. The central fire is already burning steadily. Its glow is constant, illuminating familiar faces and spaces without drawing attention to itself. The person joins the gathering. There is no awareness of separation or position. They are simply part of the shared space. Casual greetings occur nearby. Brief acknowledgments pass between individuals, light and ordinary in tone. Conversation spreads gradually around the fire. Topics remain simple daily tasks, observations, minor reflections. Nothing carries weight beyond the moment. The person listens and responds when needed. Their presence in conversation is natural and unforced. Interaction blends seamlessly into the group. As night deepens, silence grows between exchanges, not as absence, but as comfortable pauses within shared presence. The fire becomes the central focus. Its movement is steady, its light constant. People sit in relaxed clusters around it. The person remains seated for a while. There is no urgency to move or leave. The moment exists fully as it is. Gradually, people begin to disperse. One by one, they return to their dwellings in unstructured flow. The person stands and follows the familiar path. The settlement feels fully integrated now, without distinction or separation in perception. Inside, the fire is tended again. Simple actions maintain its warmth and presence. The routine continues without thought. Outside, the settlement grows quiet. Night settles fully, and movement fades into stillness across the entire space. There is no tension remaining anywhere. No process, no correction, no transition is active anymore. Only continuity remains. The person sits near the fire. Their thoughts are calm and steady, present without distraction or weight. Sleep arrives without resistance. The mind and body settle naturally into rest as part of the ongoing rhythm of life. Another day will follow, and it will continue in the same way, steady, structured, uninterrupted, not as repetition that confines, but as rhythm that sustains. And within that rhythm, life continues forward, quietly and completely. The settlement begins another day without distinction from the last. Yet, there is a strange sense of completion in its continuity. Nothing needs to be explained anymore. Nothing needs to be corrected or restored. Everything simply exists within its own steady rhythm. Morning light arrives in the same familiar pattern. It spreads across the ground, touching the same paths, the same structures, the same gathering points where life quietly resumes. The world feels unchanged, yet fully settled into itself. The person wakes without delay. There is no transition between rest and awareness anymore. The shift happens smoothly, almost silently, as if the mind has learned to follow the same rhythm as the environment. Outside, movement has already begun again. People are working, speaking, organizing, continuing their tasks with calm repetition. The settlement functions through shared habit more than instruction now. The person steps into this movement naturally. There is no separation between them and what is happening around them. They are part of the same continuous structure. Work begins immediately. Hands engage with familiar tasks. Tools are used with practiced motion, and coordination happens without spoken direction. Everything flows through understanding rather than instruction. The sound of labor fills the space again. It is steady, balanced, and unbroken, wood shaping, materials shifting, objects forming slowly under repeated effort. Time moves without interruption. There are no clear boundaries between moments anymore. Everything blends into a single, continuous progression. A brief conversation forms nearby. It is simple and functional, focused only on immediate needs and observations. The exchange is short and resolved quickly. The person joins naturally. Their voice fits into the flow of interaction without hesitation or effort. Communication feels fully normal again. There is no separation in presence. Everyone exists within the same shared rhythm, without distance or division. As midday approaches, the sun becomes stronger. Heat spreads across the open areas, and activity slows slightly. People begin to gather in shaded places. The person sits among others. There is no distinction in placement or awareness. The group exists as a single, unified presence. A quiet exchange continues. Someone mentions small progress in work. Another responds briefly. Nothing is emphasized or repeated. The person listens without effort. Their awareness is fully present in the moment, without resistance or reflection. After the pause, work resumes again. The transition is smooth and natural, requiring no instruction or signal. The person returns to their task. Movements are steady and familiar. Everything fits into place without disruption. Hours pass in quiet continuity. The settlement maintains its steady rhythm of activity and coordination. As afternoon begins to soften, light shifts again. Shadows stretch slowly across the ground, signaling the approach of evening without urgency. Work begins to slow gradually. Tools are set aside one by one, not through command, but through shared understanding. The person completes their final task. There is no emphasis on completion. The action simply reaches its natural end. People begin moving toward the central area. The movement is collective and unstructured, formed through habit and shared rhythm. The central fire burns steadily. Its glow is constant, illuminating familiar faces and spaces without drawing focus. The person joins the gathering without thought. There is no awareness of position or distance. They are fully part of the group again. Greetings are exchanged casually nearby. Brief acknowledgments pass between people, simple and ordinary in tone. Conversation spreads slowly. Topics remain light and practical: daily work, observations, minor reflections. The person listens and responds when needed. Their participation blends naturally into the group without effort. As night deepens, silence appears between conversations, not as absence, but as natural pauses within shared presence. The fire becomes the central focus. Its movement is steady, its light consistent. People sit comfortably in loose clusters. The person remains seated for a while. There is no urgency to leave or move. The moment feels complete as it is. Gradually, people begin to leave. One by one, they return to their dwellings in a natural flow. The person stands and follows. The path back feels fully familiar, part of the same continuous rhythm of life. Inside, the fire is tended again. Simple actions maintain its warmth and presence. Routine continues without thought. Outside, the settlement becomes quiet. Night settles fully, and movement fades into stillness across the space. There is no tension remaining anywhere. No process, no separation, no correction exists anymore. Only continuity. The person sits near the fire. Their thoughts are calm, steady, and present. Nothing pulls them away from the moment. Sleep arrives naturally. The mind and body settle into rest as part of the ongoing rhythm of life. Another day will follow again, and it will move in the same steady pattern: work, rest, gathering, silence, not as repetition that traps time, but as rhythm that holds it together. And within that rhythm, life continues, unchanged and complete. The settlement continues its quiet rhythm into another day. But something subtle begins to shift in how everything feels. Not in structure, not in appearance, but in perception, like the awareness of time itself has softened into something almost invisible. Morning arrives, as it always does. Light spreads gently across familiar paths, touching the same gathering spaces and work areas. Nothing is different, yet nothing feels newly noticed anymore. Everything is simply present. The person wakes without interruption. There is no transition from sleep to awareness that feels noticeable now. It happens as a single continuous movement, as if rest and waking are part of the same state. Outside, activity is already underway. People are moving through their routines, speaking briefly, organizing tasks, continuing work that never feels like it starts or ends anymore. It just continues. The person steps into this flow. There is no hesitation, no awareness of entry. They are already part of what is happening the moment they begin to move. Work begins without delay. Hands engage with familiar tools. Materials shift into place. And coordination happens without instruction or planning. Everything flows through shared understanding. The sound of activity fills the environment. It is steady, repetitive, and calm wood being shaped, surfaces adjusted, objects formed through continuous effort. Time moves without distinction. There are no clear markers of beginning or end within the day anymore. Everything blends into one ongoing motion. A brief exchange occurs nearby. Simple words about tasks, small adjustments, short acknowledgments. Nothing is emphasized. Nothing is remembered beyond the moment. The person responds naturally. Their participation is immediate, without thought or preparation. Communication is effortless. There is no separation in interaction. Everyone exists within the same shared rhythm of movement and speech. As midday arrives, the sun grows stronger. Heat spreads evenly across the settlement, and activity slows slightly in response. People gather in shaded areas without formal arrangement. The person sits among others. There is no sense of difference or distance in placement. The group exists as a single shared presence. A quiet conversation continues. Someone mentions progress in work. Another responds briefly. The exchange is simple and unremarkable. The person listens without effort. There is no need to analyze or reflect. Everything is immediate and present. After rest, work resumes smoothly. No instruction is needed. Movement restarts as part of the same continuous rhythm. The person returns to their task. Their actions are steady, familiar, and aligned with everything around them. Hours pass without interruption. The settlement continues its cycle of coordinated activity without visible change. As afternoon begins to soften, light shifts again. Shadows stretch slowly, signaling the approach of evening in a way that feels almost automatic. Work begins to slow naturally. Tools are set aside gradually, not through decision, but through shared rhythm. The person completes their final task. There is no emphasis on finishing. It simply reaches its natural conclusion. People begin moving toward the central area. The movement is collective and unstructured, formed entirely through habit. The central fire burns steadily. Its glow remains constant, illuminating the familiar gathering without drawing attention to itself. The person joins the group without thought. There is no awareness of position or separation. They are simply present among others. Greetings are exchanged quietly. Brief acknowledgments pass between people, light and ordinary. Conversation spreads slowly around the fire. Topics remain simple daily work, observations, small remarks about the day. The person listens and responds when needed. Their voice blends easily into the group, without effort or hesitation. As night deepens, silence grows between conversations, not as absence, but as natural pauses in shared presence. The fire becomes the center again. Its movement is steady, its light unchanged. People sit comfortably in loose clusters. The person remains seated for a while. There is no urgency to leave or move away. The moment is complete as it is. Gradually, people begin to leave. One by one, they return to their dwellings without structure or direction. The person stands and follows. The path feels entirely familiar now, part of the same continuous rhythm of life. Inside, the fire is tended again. Simple actions maintain warmth and light without thought or reflection. Outside, the settlement grows quiet. Night settles fully, and movement fades into stillness across the entire space. There is no tension left anywhere, no process, no correction, no transition exists in the present moment. Only continuity remains. The person sits near the fire. Their thoughts are calm, steady, and undisturbed. Presence is enough. Sleep arrives naturally. The mind and body settle into rest as part of the ongoing flow of life. Another day will follow again, and it will move in the same pattern, steady, familiar, uninterrupted. But now, even the idea of repetition feels distant, because everything has become rhythm, and rhythm no longer asks to be noticed. It simply continues. The settlement continues into another day, but something subtle has begun to settle deeper than before. Not change in structure, not change in routine, but a quiet acceptance of continuity that no longer draws attention to itself. Morning light spreads across the same familiar landscape. The paths, the dwellings, the gathering points all remain unchanged in form. Yet the way they are perceived feels smoother, as if the mind no longer pauses to register each detail separately. The person wakes in the same seamless rhythm. There is no moment of separation between sleep and awareness anymore. One simply flows into the other without interruption or recognition of transition. Outside, the settlement is already in motion. People are working, speaking briefly, organizing their tasks through habit. Everything begins without announcement, as if the day has always been underway. The person steps into this movement naturally. There is no sense of entry or arrival. They are already part of what is happening the moment they begin to act. Work resumes immediately. Hands engage with familiar materials. Tools move with practiced precision, and coordination happens without instruction. Everything operates through shared rhythm. The sound of activity fills the space again. It is steady and continuous, wood being shaped, surfaces adjusted, objects formed through repetition rather than urgency. Time moves without visible structure. There are no clear divisions between moments anymore. The day feels like a single, uninterrupted flow. A brief exchange forms nearby. Simple observations about tasks, small confirmations, short responses. Nothing is emphasized or held beyond the moment. The person responds when needed. Their voice fits easily into the ongoing conversation. There is no hesitation, no awareness of effort. Interaction feels fully integrated. Everyone exists within the same shared rhythm of communication and work. As midday approaches, the sun grows stronger. Heat spreads across the settlement, and activity naturally slows. People gather in shaded areas without arrangement. The person sits among others. There is no awareness of separation or position. The group exists as a single shared presence within the moment. A quiet conversation continues. Someone mentions small progress in work. Another responds briefly. The exchange is simple and unremarkable. The person listens without effort. Nothing requires interpretation or reflection. Everything remains immediate and clear. After rest, movement resumes again. There is no instruction, no signal. Work continues as part of the same ongoing cycle. The person returns to their task. Their actions are steady, familiar, and fully aligned with those around them. Hours pass in uninterrupted rhythm. The settlement continues its coordinated activity without disruption or change. As afternoon begins to soften, light shifts again. Shadows stretch gradually, signaling the approach of evening without urgency or emphasis. Work slows naturally. Tools are set aside one by one, not through decision, but through shared timing. The person completes their final task. There is no emphasis on ending. The action simply reaches its natural conclusion. People begin moving toward the central area. The movement is collective and unstructured, formed entirely through habit. The central fire burns steadily. Its glow remains constant, illuminating familiar faces without drawing attention to itself. The person joins the gathering without thought. There is no awareness of separation or difference. They are simply part of the group. Greetings are exchanged quietly. Brief acknowledgments pass between individuals, light and ordinary in tone. Conversation spreads gradually. Topics remain simple daily work, observations, small remarks about routine matters. The person listens and responds when needed. Their participation blends seamlessly into the group. As night deepens, silence grows between conversations, not as absence, but as natural pauses within shared presence. The fire becomes the center again. Its movement is steady, its light unchanged. People sit comfortably in loose clusters. The person remains seated for a while. There is no urgency to leave or move. The moment is complete in itself. Gradually, people begin to disperse. One by one, they return to their dwellings without structure or direction. The person stands and follows. The path feels entirely familiar, part of the same continuous rhythm that defines each day. Inside, the fire is tended again. Simple motions maintain warmth and light without thought or effort. Outside, the settlement grows quiet. Night settles fully, and movement fades into stillness across the entire space. There is no tension remaining anywhere, no process, no correction, no separation exists in the present moment. Only continuity remains. The person sits near the fire. Their thoughts are calm and steady. Nothing pulls them away from the present. Sleep arrives naturally. The body and mind settle into rest as part of the same ongoing rhythm. Another day will follow again, and it will continue in the same steady pattern work: rest, gathering, silence. But even the idea of another day feels less like a beginning now, and more like a continuation that never truly stopped. The settlement moves through another cycle of days, but something subtle has begun to feel different, not in structure, not in activity, but in the way time itself is no longer felt as separate moments. Everything flows as one continuous surface now. Morning arrives with the same soft light as always. The ground, the paths, the dwellings all appear unchanged. Yet there is a strange absence of contrast between before and after, as if those ideas have quietly dissolved. The person wakes without awareness of transition. Sleep ends and presence begins, but there is no point where one becomes the other. It is simply continuity continuing. Outside, the settlement is already active. People move through their routines with calm familiarity, their actions guided by habit rather than thought. There is no beginning to the day that anyone seems to notice anymore. The person steps into this movement naturally. There is no moment of entry. They are already within it as soon as they act. Work begins as it always does. Hands move through familiar motions. Tools are used with practiced ease, and coordination happens without instruction or hesitation. The sound of activity forms a steady background. It is constant, but not loud, wood shaping, materials shifting, tasks being completed in repetition. Time no longer feels segmented. It stretches as a single ongoing state, without clear boundaries between hours. A brief exchange occurs nearby. Simple words, short acknowledgments, immediate responses. Nothing is held beyond its moment. The person speaks when needed. Their voice fits into the rhythm without disruption. There is no sense of effort in communication anymore. Interaction is fully natural. Everyone exists within the same shared pattern of movement and speech. As midday arrives, the sun grows stronger overhead. Heat spreads across the settlement, and activity gently slows in response. People gather in shaded spaces without formal arrangement. The person sits among others. There is no separation, no distinction in presence. The group feels unified simply by being together. A quiet conversation continues. Someone mentions progress in tasks. Another responds briefly. The exchange is simple and unremarkable. The person listens without effort. There is nothing to interpret beyond what is said. Everything remains immediate and clear. After rest, movement resumes again. No signal is needed. Work begins as part of the same continuous rhythm. The person returns to their task. Their actions remain steady, familiar, and fully integrated with the group. Hours pass without noticeable structure. The settlement continues its coordinated activity without interruption or change. As afternoon begins to soften, light shifts gradually. Shadows lengthen slowly across the ground, marking the approach of evening without emphasis. Work slows naturally. Tools are set aside one by one, not through decision, but through shared rhythm. The person completes their final task. There is no sense of ending, only completion within continuation. People begin moving toward the central area. The movement is collective and unspoken, formed entirely through habit. The central fire burns steadily. Its glow remains constant, illuminating the familiar gathering without drawing focus. The person joins without thought. There is no awareness of position or distance. They are simply part of the group. Greetings are exchanged softly. Brief acknowledgments pass between individuals, light and ordinary. Conversation spreads gradually around the fire. Topics remain simple daily work, observations, minor reflections about routine matters. The person listens and responds when needed. Their participation blends seamlessly into the group without effort. As night deepens, silence grows between conversations, not as absence, but as natural pauses within shared presence. the fire becomes the center of attention. Its movement is steady, its light unchanged. People sit in relaxed clusters around it. The person remains seated for a while. There is no urgency to leave or move. The moment feels complete as it is. Gradually, people begin to disperse. One by one, they return to their dwellings in unstructured flow. The person stands and follows. The path back feels entirely familiar, part of the same continuous rhythm of life. Inside, the fire is tended again. Simple actions maintain warmth and light without thought or reflection. Outside, the settlement grows quiet. Night settles fully, and movement fades into stillness across the entire space. There is no tension anywhere, no process, no correction. No separation remains active in the present moment. Only continuity exists. The person sits near the fire. Their thoughts are calm, steady, and unburdened. Nothing pulls them away from the present. Sleep arrives naturally. The mind and body settle into rest as part of the ongoing rhythm of life. Another day will follow again. But now, even another day no longer feels like a new beginning. It feels like the same moment, continuing without end. And in that continuation, everything remains exactly as it is. The settlement enters what feels like the same day again, though the idea of again no longer carries weight. There is no clear boundary between what was and what is now unfolding. Everything exists in one long, continuous presence. Morning light spreads across the familiar landscape, as it always does. The paths, the dwellings, the gathering spaces all remain unchanged in form. Yet, even this recognition feels distant, as if observation itself has softened into background awareness. The person wakes without distinction between rest and awareness. There is no moment of transition anymore. Sleep simply dissolves, and presence remains. Outside, movement has already begun. People are working, speaking briefly, and continuing tasks that appear to have no beginning or end. The settlement functions through quiet continuity. The person steps into this flow without hesitation. There is no entry point, no separation. They are already part of what is happening. Work resumes as a constant state. Hands move through familiar actions. Tools are used with steady precision, and coordination happens without instruction. The sound of activity remains steady. Wood is shaped, materials are adjusted, and structures continue forming through repetition. Time no longer feels divided. There are no clear edges between moments, only an ongoing progression that never stops. Brief exchanges occur nearby. Simple words, short confirmations, immediate responses. Nothing is carried beyond its instant. The person speaks when needed. Their voice blends into the surrounding rhythm without awareness of effort or choice. Interaction feels fully absorbed into routine. There is no distinction between self and group in communication anymore. As midday approaches, The sun grows stronger. Heat spreads evenly across the settlement, and activity slows slightly without disruption. People gather in shaded areas. The arrangement is natural, unplanned, and familiar. The person sits among them. There is no sense of separation or position. Presence itself is shared. A quiet exchange continues. Small observations, simple acknowledgments, brief responses about ongoing tasks. The person listens without interpretation. Everything remains immediate and unweighted. After rest, movement resumes again. There is no signal, no instruction. Work continues as part of continuous rhythm. The person returns to their task. Every motion feels aligned with what is already happening around them. Hours pass without structure. The settlement continues its coordinated activity without interruption or change. As afternoon softens, light shifts gently. Shadows stretch across the ground in a slow, natural movement. Work begins to slow, not through decision, but through shared rhythm of completion. The person finishes their final action. There is no sense of ending, only continuation reaching its natural flow. People move toward the central area. The movement is collective and unspoken, formed through habit alone. The central fire burns steadily. Its glow remains constant, anchoring the gathering without drawing focus. The person joins without thought. There is no awareness of separation or arrival. Greetings pass quietly. Brief acknowledgments, light and ordinary. Conversation spreads gradually. Topics remain simple daily tasks, observations, small reflections. The person listens and responds when needed. Participation feels completely natural and unforced. As night deepens, silence grows between conversations. Not emptiness, but shared pauses within presence. The fire becomes the center. Its movement is steady, its light unchanged. People sit in calm clusters around it. The person remains seated. There is no urgency to move or leave. The moment feels complete in itself. Gradually, people begin to disperse. One by one, they return to their dwellings without structure or direction. The person stands and follows. The path feels fully integrated into continuity now. Inside, the fire is tended again. Simple actions maintain warmth without thought or reflection. Outside, the settlement grows quiet. Night settles fully, and movement fades into stillness. There is no tension remaining anywhere. No process, no correction, no separation exists anymore. Only continuity remains. The person sits near the fire. Thoughts are calm, steady, and present without disturbance. Sleep arrives naturally. The mind and body settle into rest as part of ongoing rhythm. Another day follows again, but even that phrase no longer feels like repetition, because nothing is returning anymore. It is simply continuing, and within that continuation, life does not begin or end. It only exists.